It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am your host, Steve Moore, economist, somebody who's been working on these issues of how our economy works, our nation's finances, the politics of all these things. I've been doing it for 40 years, folks. I started in 1984 very proudly as a member of the Reagan administration. I've worked at the Heritage Foundation. I worked for 10 years at the Wall Street Journal editorial board as the senior economics writer. I started a group called the Club for Growth. I was the senior economist at the Cato Institute. I was very proud to not only have worked for the great Ronald Reagan. And by the way, I just got back last week from the Reagan Library. And for those of you who listened to the show last week, you know that I was just so pumped up by that trip. And I want to recommend to every one of my listeners, if you are in Southern California, you've not been to the Reagan Library, you have to go. It's in Simi Valley, just to the east of Los Angeles. Excuse me. And it is a spectacular, uplifting, patriotic experience to go to the Reagan Library. I stood in front of one of the big chunks of the Berlin Wall, which, thanks to Reagan, came tumbling down. And it's important that we pay honor to one of our five greatest presidents and remember that his admonition was that government is not the solution, government is the problem. And that was true 40 years ago. And ladies and gentlemen, it is especially true today. And so anyway, I'm so pleased that so many of you join me every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. on WABC. And I know we have a number of affiliates throughout the country because we get callers calling in sometimes from Georgia, sometimes from Maine, sometimes from Chicago. We had some people calling in from Utah a couple of weeks ago. So it's so fantastic that we have such a wide reach. And I appreciate you're the people who make my show successful. Our ratings are good because people like you care about our country, care about our finances, care about your own finances. And we like to have fun on this show as well. So we have some great guests as usual today. And one of them is the great Liz McDonald, who will be coming on a little later. You all know Liz McDonald from Fox News. She's a superstar. She has a show on Fox Business News from 5 to 6 p.m. called The Evening Edit. And she's going to be talking about Biden corruption. And then my good friend David Bossie will be coming on later in the show. David Bossie is very close to Donald Trump. He is one of the key architects of the Trump victory back in 2016. He's working on the campaign this time. He's helping on the convention that's coming up shortly. And so David is filled with information about what's going on in the country, what's going on with the Trump campaign. So I can't wait to have him on. And we have other great guests as well. We're going to talk a little bit with my friend Jonathan Williams, who is the executive director of a group called ALEC, and he's going to tell us about all that's going on across the country in policy, everywhere from California to Massachusetts down to Georgia and in the Midwest. And what are the big trends that are happening in our states that we would like to see coming to the Northeast? And by the way, I know most of our listeners are in the Northeast. Most of you are in the New York area, but many of you are not. And now I would like to start the show by being deadly serious with you folks about something that happened this week that I found so deeply troubling. And I'm not trying to depress people. I'm an uplifting guy. I'm an optimist, and I do think America can get out of its problems. I believe that. I believe that Ronald Reagan was right when he said that it was divine providence that put America here as a beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. I really believe that. I'm not a deeply religious man, but I believe this didn't happen by chance. And we are the last best hope for this human race. If we don't get it right, I guarantee you folks, nobody else is going to get it right. certainly not as right as we could and should be doing. And so I'm a Republican. Most of you know that. And I appreciate so much when my more liberal friends and some of my Democratic friends and independent friends listen to the show. I try to be as fair as possible. This is freedom of speech radio. So I like to take calls from people with all sorts of different different viewpoints. That's what makes America a great thing, that we can disagree without being disagreeable. But there's one thing we cannot disagree on, folks. And I'm going to submit that this is something that, I don't know, 90 to 95% of people will agree with me on, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever it might be. And what I'm talking about is this report that came out this past week, about 3 or 4 days ago, from the official budget scorekeeper in Washington, and it's called the Congressional Budget Office. And they put out a report once or twice a year measuring what's happening with our nation's finances. Because we have a $7 trillion government. That's a huge entity. It's the largest government in the world, in the history of the world. Well, what are we doing with our finances? And this report, and again, I've done this since 1984 when Reagan was president. So count them. That's 40 budgets, 40 annual budgets that I have reviewed. I'm not saying that to brag, because I'm just saying I'm getting old and I've been doing this. I've been there, done that, but I never seen anything like this. Never. I mean, this report is so dire. It's like a fire alarm blaring, and nobody in Washington is doing anything about this. And I don't know, maybe I'm being, a little bit, too wild here, maybe too pessimistic. And I'm normally an optimist, but I look at these numbers, and I'm going to recite these to you folks because they are critically important to the future of our country. And by the way, I'm 64. Most of the costs that we're bearing with all of this borrowing, all of this debt, all of this money printing, it's not really going to affect me that much. I mean, I'm getting older, but I care a lot about my kids. I have 5 sons, 2 stepsons and 3 sons. They range in ages from 17 to 32. And I really, what's the old saying? You're only as happy as your least happy child. And I want to make sure that they're happy, successful, good people, and that the same thing happens for our country. And it ain't happening right now. So let me go over some of these numbers with you. And you can tell me if you think I'm just being, overly alarmist here. I don't think I am, but here are some of these numbers. So under the Joe Biden baseline, and I'm not blaming this just on Joe Biden. Let me be very clear on this. I think a pox on both parties. They are filled with big spending, big government, spendaholics who have no idea how to operate a business or operate a government. And they are running our government into the ground. So here are the numbers. If we stay on the course that Joe Biden wants, we will borrow $2 trillion. By the way, that's 2 followed by 12 zeros, $2 trillion a year, every single year in 2024 and 2025 and 2026 and 2027, 2028. I mean, I could, for the next 50 years. I mean, that's the course that this president has put us on. Now, look, a lot's going to change, but even in the near term, we can't afford this. This year, we're supposed to be in a rah-rah recovery, right? Biden's running around the country saying how well things are going. Now, I think he's living in an alternative world, thinking that everything is going well in the country. But it is a recovery. We're not in a recession right now, and yet we're borrowing $2 trillion a year. Like, what's that? Like $5 billion a day or something like that. I mean, these numbers are so large, they're incomprehensible. But we're going to have a debt that's going to be about $500,000 for every child soon. So, you have a child. For those younger people out there, you have a child, a son or a daughter, and welcome to the world. Welcome to the USA. Here's your $500,000. That's not exactly leaving our future generation better off, is it, when we accumulate that kind of debt? Now, I'm always asked, what are the consequences of this enormous debt? What is this going to mean for our country if we continue to stay on this course of a national debt that is expected. These are Joe Biden's own numbers, folks. Congressional Budget Office, they're the authorities. I'm not making these up. What is the effect if we go to a $50 trillion national debt in 10 years? By the way, back in 1984, when I got started, the national debt was $1 trillion. Now we're talking about $50 trillion. Stay tuned, folks. I'll be right back. And when I come back, I'm going to walk through what the repercussions of these enormous deficit spending patterns will be for our country. It's not a pleasant story, but every American has to hear it. I'll be right back. This is the More Money Show. I'm economist Steve Moore, and stay tuned because I want to walk you through this, folks. So do not turn off your radio.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am so pleased to have a great friend and colleague and one of the most brilliant people I know on the economy, on politics. You all know her from Fox News and her great show, The Evening Edit on Fox Business, every 5 p.m., right? And every Monday through Friday. Excellent show. I, every once in a while, have the honor of coming on her show. So I said, Liz, I'm only going to come on your show if you will come on this radio show. And she was so polite to do that. So let's get right into it, Liz. Thanks for coming on.
Sure.
Let's first talk about your overall take on the economy. We got some polls results in the last week or two that show that Biden and Trump are kind of running neck and neck, that Biden's made up some ground. We've had some economic news in the last couple of weeks has been more positive than it had been in previous months. Inflation is coming down, but we still have inflation. The GDP now number is at 3%, which is pretty high. So how do you, you're covering the economy every day, every night, you're covering the stock market. How do you assess the health of the economy right now?
So the one number that I'm really looking at more closely, along with a lot of other economists, and I know you probably looked at it too, is the U.S. Household Survey. Yep. And that number, I know you probably have talked about it already, it's really interesting that there were only, Biden says he created more than 15 million jobs. That a lot of that are the jobs clawed back, after the pandemic shutdown stopped. So that's like the rooster taking credit for the sun going up. But, so right. This is, there was something like, it's not more than 15 million. There's the household survey by the BLS. Yes. Actually, it calls people of actual people for the survey, and 2.4 million jobs created since February 2020. That number, the number of jobs has not moved over the last year or so, and there are actually less people employed right now than July of 2023. So I am looking at revisions. We know that E.J. Antoni has done this too. I've done some legwork on this, and that is the revisions downward. It's something approaching 770,000 less jobs were created last year than what the government reported. So we're always looking at the revisions, right? So that's what I'm focused on.
And so it is. Look, I think that the establishment survey is a bigger survey and it's a more accurate survey. But you're right. We've had an incredible divergence of these two surveys that are done, one showing job losses and the other showing job gains. And look, I have friends who work over the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I don't think they're distorting I don't think they're cheating. I think that it's just we're measuring different things. And one of the things that the establishment survey doesn't really measure is small businesses and their hiring, because most of the establishments that are in the establishment survey are bigger companies. And so that's troubling to me that you're getting less small businesses, Les.
Yeah, that's quite right. And they have created, I think, all of net new job growth over the last decade or so. So what I'm looking toward right now, everybody's looking toward the CNN presidential debate next week. I'm interested that they're not allowed to have pre-written notes with them. We know that there will be a mute button. We know that Trump does get the last word. I'm watching the Siena poll. He's gaining on Biden in the blue state of New York. He's down by just 8 points right now. The Marist poll has him up. Emerson poll has him up. He's still holding strong. He's still leading in the swing states and multiple polls. He often claims he was the poorest man in the Senate. That's really because he took out multiple loans for houses. He likes big houses.
Right.
He said he's been obsessed with real estate. Bought a 10,000 square foot mansion once owned by the DuPonts with a swimming pool and ballroom. And, he had multiple loans and mortgages. What I'm really interested, too, is digging into what Biden won't talk about. And that is the Biden family has a long history dating back at least 100 years of the government investigating and accusing family members for abusing and taking excessive profits from U.S. government military contracts dating back to World War I through World War II. So, Joe Biden has been campaigning. My father was out of work when he was growing up. But one likely reason is, according to this New Yorker magazine story, the federal government had to claw back $8 million in today's dollars from the family ship repair business his father worked at because the government found they excessively took 4 times the average going rate of profits on contracts for the Navy in World War II. So, this report says this family ship repair business that Joe Biden's father worked at evolved out of the great uncle's roofing business in World War I. That great uncle won war contracts in World War I, at least $1 million to lay asphalt roofs on Army supply warehouses in Norfolk, Virginia. Wait for this. The Army wanted and needed the roofs finished quickly. They needed to expedite the delivery of really critical supplies to American troops in Europe. But Biden's great uncle resisted pressure from the Army to do everything he could to hurry the work because he knew he'd make less money on the contracts if he expended more resources to rapidly fulfill them. So listen to this. The job was not completed until the summer of 1919, more than 6 months after World War I ended. And Steve, who was really unapologetic, he told the government investigators, well, the incentive is to make a profit in the first place. And the government said, wait a second. That's not proper, what you did.
Liz, and the thing that's so interesting about that is that Joe Biden, our president, is one who hates the word profits. If any company dare make an honest profit, he says they're not making their fair share or they're price gouging and so on. And that's an interesting history because it shows, I mean, look, what I care about is Joe Biden himself, but what you're telling is it's almost like, like father, like grandson, like son, like grandson. I mean, there's this kind of history of corruption. And one of the things that I can't understand about Joe Biden is, he openly boasts, Liz, that he's never had a job. He said, I've never earned a paycheck. He's been, since he was in his early 30s, he's basically always been in government. And I think that's one of the key things that the American people have to understand. Whether you like Joe Biden, whether you like Donald Trump is a businessman. He became a billionaire because of his business acumen. He knows how to make a payroll. He knows how to make a profit. Biden hates profit because he doesn't have any idea how to make one.
Yeah, he's been in government for about 50 years. So you watch Senator Joe Biden in 1974 on campaign finance reform. These are direct quotes of what he said. Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt. You have to go to people who have money and they always want something. You run the risk of deciding whether or not to prostitute yourself to give the answer they want to hear in order to get funded for office. He says it's coincidental in many instances when you happen to agree with where they're at, the people are giving the money. So the money matters more. He also said, I think the American public, in a way, rips us off, we politicians, by forcing us to run the way they do. So he's blaming the public for basically campaign finance corruption. And he said, we have a lot going for us incumbents and we use it, meaning money. He said, I went to the big guys for the money. I was ready to prostitute myself. I'm like the token black or token woman. So those are exact quotes from Joe Biden in 1974.
Yep. And it doesn't sound like he sounds too different 50 years later.
So, Steve, and you've talked about this too. When you look at the student loan bailout, now the CBO says that's 27% of the federal budget deficit. So the budget deficit is now blown out to 1.9 trillion annual deficit. So that's the character. That's the psyche of the person we've been living with for 50 years. And I have to say this, I feel really badly for millennials and for the younger generation because this is not normal. This is an abnormal presidency. The American people deserve a better president who fights for the American people, who doesn't think they're just a president of this wing of the Democrat Party or this ideological faction, that they'll fight for everybody. So
yeah, remember when he ran for president the first time and won. He promised the American people he would be a uniter, and I can't think of a single issue, not one issue, where he has united the country. Can you?
Right. No. And so, I've been doing journalism since 1986. I covered, the IRS. I covered, for example, the Kennedy administration using the IRS to attack their political enemies, including ending up auditing Lee Harvey Oswald's group. I've covered corporate accounting scandals at the Wall Street Journal. I've been watching D.C. for a very long time. So when I see Joe Biden just catapult through the ranks to become president, you have to watch. Just take the words Biden, Joe, Nancy Pelosi, Trump out, and we look discreetly, 30,000-foot perspective. You look what happened to Trump. Even before he sat down in the Oval Office, they wanted to impeach him. They were within months. Al Green files an impeachment. They leaked his tax returns. Nancy Pelosi launches 85 targets to go after Trump, including Stormy Daniels, including the Trump business, including his tax returns, and including classified documents. That dates back to 2018. So amazing. This is a very orchestrated effort we've never seen before by a Democrat Party that's not our grandparents' party. It's not the Tip O'Neill kind of Dick Gephardt, Bill Bradley, even Al Gore or Clinton negotiating. This is something different. And it's led by a very aggressive man named Joe Biden, who is openly talking about prostituting himself in 1974.
It sure is. By the way, I'm talking to the great Liz McDonald of Fox News. Liz, is there any way I could hold you over for just a few minutes?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. This is the More Money Show. My guest is Liz McDonald, the superstar from Fox News, and we will be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I am your host, Steve Moore, and I'm so thrilled to have as my guest bringing back Liz McDonald, who, of course, is the host of the great show Evening Edit, which is on from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday on Fox Business News, and you see her all the time on assorted Fox shows. Liz, we were talking before the break about corruption, something you are an expert at ruling out. And I wanted to bring up something to you and get your reaction to it. When I've been in this game a long time, you've been in the game a long time. When I first came to Washington, there were good Democrats. I mean, there were Democrats who maybe I didn't even agree with, but I thought they were good people. They were honest people. They didn't like corruption, and they cared about things like civil liberties. And it's not just Joe Biden, and you're quite correct about the corruption of that family, but it seems to me that what's happened, especially in the era of Trump, is that they have lost any regard for people's liberties, rights, First Amendment rights, Second Amendment, Third, Fourth Amendment rights. Am I imagining this, or what do you think?
I've never seen the level of bullying going on that's coming out of this Democrat Party. And it's led by Schumer, Pelosi, and Joe Biden behind the scenes. And Obama has to be dying seeing the corruption coming out of Joe Biden. I mean, I do think when you just, again, take out the names, do the exercise, you'll see how they totally railroaded Trump before he started to sit down in the Oval Office. There was a big effort to just get him, just get Trump. But, and then when I'm looking at old videos and footage of, for example, Joe Biden talking to Tom Brokaw. And Tom Brokaw is asking Joe Biden about him helping MBNA with legislation. And why did MBNA hire Hunter Biden? But, Joe Biden asked, well, Hunter wanted to come home in order to work in Delaware. No, Hunter's wife said, he got a salary that was greater than anything I'd ever imagined anyone our age earning. Right. And then it goes on. Joe Biden reportedly also got the full asking price selling his home to a top MBNA executive for $1.2 million bucks when it was in disrepair. At least 15 MBNA executives donated to Biden's campaign, biggest source of campaign contributions to Biden. And Byron York did this story in 2008, quote, the senator from MBNA, that, the topic.
By the way, what does that stand for? And
I'm not sure. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. But, what kind of company is it?
It's a bank. So
a bank.
It was a credit card company.
Yeah.
Thank you. A credit card company. So the top, when do you see the top executive of a rich company buy the home of a financially strapped senator, pay a generous price, then the entire top management of the company gets together in a coordinated campaign to donate money to Senator Biden, getting around campaign contribution limits, and then after the senator is reelected, the MBNA hires Hunter Biden for a mystery job no one at MBNA could describe. What do you call that? Seriously, what do you call that?
It's corruption.
You know?
Yeah. And so this has been, you're saying this is the legacy of Joe Biden and his family.
Yeah, what I'm saying is this is tip of the iceberg stuff of what we know about now. Mm-hmm. We don't even know the half of what's going on behind the scenes. And I talk to, have on the air James Comer, Jim Jordan all the time. By the way, NBC stands for the Maryland Bank National Association.
Okay. Okay.
So anyway, so they are being blockaded by National Archives, by, the Biden administration. They've basically ring-fenced off congressional investigators to see what really is happening with this, again, truly abnormal presidency, the likes we've never seen before, of a person who's been, as you point out, in office since 1972-74, who admitted, yes, I prostitute myself for campaign donations, who has a family history of government grift, and then it rolls into the whole, investigation into Hunter Biden. Now it's pushing toward $30 million squirreled away in off-balance sheet shell companies selling access to Joe Biden.
And meanwhile, these are the same people. These are the same people who, want to put Trump in jail for 300 years. Yeah.
So I just think this is about informed consent. I'm always, big on the truth, big on trying to get to the bottom of things. I don't think the Democrat voter really understands, or the independent voter or any voter understands the true depth to what happened with this Biden family, with what Joe Biden did with his office. I mean, can you name one accomplishment he did besides the crime bill? Or going easy on bankruptcy, helping MBNA with credit card legislation?
No, I can't. And he's voted for every big spending bill. He's one of the single most responsible people for our enormous debt. He never saw a spending program he didn't like. And he has leveraged. I mean, how many homes does this guy have? How many does he own? How do you become a multimillionaire if you've been in Congress your whole life? I mean, it's that simple.
It's right. So a lot of people are asking that. And let me just, I'm just trying to do the job of just finding out, right? I don't have a skin in the game or anything. I just think the voter deserves transparency, deserves to have an informed consent, and they certainly didn't get it before the 2020 election. So we were out there, and early on, we were getting really hammered in 2020, reporting this stuff on the air, but we're still going to do it. We're still going to keep going.
Awesome. Well, Liz, thanks so much for joining. That's the great Liz McDonald from Fox Business News. This is the More Money Show on WABC, and folks, we'll be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio and many affiliates throughout the country. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your weekend to become informed about what is going on with our nation's finances, our economy, the political situation. For those of you who are just joining, I got on my soapbox, which I don't always do on the show, but I feel so strongly about this new report that has come out on our nation's finances, and it is frightening, folks. It is something that should wake up every American. And I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. I'm not blaming this on Joe Biden exclusively. Joe Biden deserves a lot of the blame, but it's Republicans, Democrats, our politicians are running our country over a financial cliff, and it is not going to be pretty if it continues. So I wanted to bring into the conversation a good friend, an excellent economist. He is one of the leading economists at the Heritage Foundation. He works with me at Unleashed Prosperity. You see him on Fox News and other popular programs. E.J. Antoni. E.J., thanks for joining this afternoon.
Steve, thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right down to it, EJ. I was telling my audience that I've been doing this for 40 years. I've been doing it a lot longer than you have. But, I've looked at these annual reports on the budget. And this one that we just saw this week from the Congressional Budget Office with these $2 trillion deficits for as far as the eye can see, I believe that this is a prescription for national disaster. What say you?
Oh, Steve, I could not have put it any better myself. I mean, really, if people want to know what does it mean to spend an extra $50 trillion that we don't have, well, look at what has happened the past few years when we spent just a few trillion, let's call it
right.
6 or 7 trillion that we didn't have. We got 40-year high inflation. What do we think is going to happen if we put that on steroids, if we do something 10x as big? I mean, that's what the CBO is telling us. We are staring down the barrel of a cannon at this point.
So I think it's very well put. As you know, EJ, and the Wall Street Journal put this very well in their editorial the other day, it really is not so much a revenue problem. The revenues have been pretty constant. And in fact, if anything, the amount of revenue we're getting, even with the Trump tax cut in place, they've been pretty steady. It's just that the spending has taken off like a rocket ship.
Exactly. The economy pretty consistently delivers somewhere about 17% of GDP as tax revenue. And what's interesting, right, Steve, is that, as you know, no matter how much we really increase or lower the rates, you still get about the same
right.
amount of revenue.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. Because we have a record-sized economy, we have record-sized tax revenues. And despite those records, we're still not keeping pace with the spending growth. You're right. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Well, in addition to that, EJ, I was looking at these numbers on the receipts that come into the government, and I was surprised to see that the corporate tax receipts, because we have a corporate income tax, and Trump, I think very wisely lowered our rate from the highest in the world at, we're at about 41% down to about 24, 25%, which is, closer to the international average. And once we did that, a lot of the money started coming back in the United States because taxes do determine where money is invested. And so lo and behold, the corporate tax revenues since Trump did the rate reduction have almost doubled. Did you know that?
I didn't know they had doubled. That's phenomenal, though. And one of the reasons why it's so good that they cut the rate was exactly what you just mentioned, Steve. You have all of these businesses that are now coming back, this re-onshoring, if you will, to the United States. And instead of that business, instead of that tax revenue going to some foreign government, it's going to the U.S. Treasury instead. I think that's a win-win.
You would think so. You would think so, my friend. And so let's get to the most important issue of all. And it's the reason I brought you on, EJ, is that I'm asked all the time by my listeners. I get emails, I get letters, I get phone calls, I get texts. People are saying, okay, how is this going to end? In other words, how bad can it get? If we allow this Biden baseline, that takes the deficit up $2 trillion a year, that lands us in 10 years at a $50 trillion national debt. How is this going to end? I mean, it cannot have a happy ending, but how do you see it playing out if we continue to do this?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's just going to be more of the same. In other words, what we saw the last 3 years, but just a whole heck of a lot more of it. And,
right.
Fortunately, this is not foreordained. This can be changed.
Yes, it can.
The Great Depression, for example, that did not have to happen. There was a crash in 1929, of course. But then it was the policies of Hoover and then the policies of FDR that continuously made the Depression worse and kept that going for over a decade. And so if we continue down the path that we're on right now, I think that's how bad it can get. So
that lasted 10 years. That was a 10-year depression. And you're right. What did they do? They had what could have been just a short-term financial crisis, the crash of 29, and then as our friend Amity Schlaze notes, almost every government response to the financial crisis was exactly the wrong thing to do. More regulations, tax rates that went up, as high as 80, 70, 80, 90%. You had the Smoot-Hawley tariff. You had one bad policy after another. And as our friend Amity Slay says, Hoover and Roosevelt, two of our worst presidents, in my opinion, actually turned a financial crisis into a Great Depression. And my point is, EJ, I don't want to see that happen again to our country.
Steve, I'm right there with you. This is absolutely the last thing we want. But unfortunately, that's the trajectory that we're headed down. Now, it does seem like both this government and the Treasury, the Federal Reserve at all levels, it seems like their intent is not so much to cause another recession or depression, so much as it is to just inflate away the real value of the debt, because every time they decrease the value of the dollar, what that ends up doing is making it cheaper in real terms for the government to repay its debt. Now, it impoverishes Americans in the process, but that's how they've been keeping down, if you will, the real cost of servicing this debt. And I think that's the play going forward.
I think that is certainly a plausible scenario, and that's what they've done so far. Is they just keep printing money, right? So we spend, we borrow, and to pay off the bonds, we print money, and that could. Now, there's another scenario, as you know, EJ, which is that Joe Biden, if you listen to him, he says all we have to do is raise taxes on the rich. If we just get rid of the Trump tax cut and make the rich pay their fair share, we can lower the deficit.
Well, like we were saying earlier, Steve, no matter how much you increase those rates, you can't get blood from a stone. You really never seem to get much higher than about 17% of the economy in terms of tax revenue. That's just where things cap out for a whole lot of different reasons. But I find it so ironic that they keep talking about the rich paying their fair share. If you let the Trump tax cuts expire, one of the things that will do is you will go back to unlimited SALT deductions. As you know, Steve, you were part of this whole process.
Yeah.
And what will happen is you will have.
Hold on. Explain to people what the SALT deduction was for people who are not familiar with that.
Oh, certainly. So SALT is an acronym for state and local tax deductions. And what this allows is for people to actually deduct from their federal tax returns how much they pay in state and local taxes. Now, for the vast majority of us, we don't actually pay that much in state and local taxes relative to our incomes. So it's just not worth it for us to have this deduction. But if you're a very wealthy person in a high tax state, in other words, if you're a Democrat donor in a Democrat-run state, this is extremely valuable to you. It saves you literally millions of dollars for high income earners in a place like Manhattan. And so what happened is by capping that deduction at $10,000, the Trump tax reform actually ensured that those people would be paying their fair share. And what does Biden want to do? He wants to overturn that. He wants to put it back to the way it was, where those very wealthy Democrats in those Democrat-run cities and states can get more tax returns.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because, having worked on that Trump tax plan and worked with Congress and worked with Trump and helped put this thing together, I was always the person in the room because there was always pressure to reinstate the state and local tax deduction. And I was always insistent that we get rid of it because I didn't. And look, I know that most of our audience, most of you live in high tax states like Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, but it's just not fair. And by the way, if you're concerned about that and you're a wealthy person, then you have two choices: either get New York and New Jersey or California or wherever you live to lower their taxes, which would serve to make sense. I mean, you got Florida and Texas that have no income tax at all, or move out. And by the way, we did a study, Laffer and I, right after that bill passed, predicting that these states would lose well over 1 million people if they didn't change their tax systems, and they didn't. And guess what? They've lost. We underestimated how many people would move out.
Right. Steve, exactly. That's 100% right. And I think it just goes to show you that not only are these tax loopholes, things like the SALT deduction, not only are they a handout to wealthy individuals in high tax states, but they're also really a handout to those local governments, those state governments that impose these high taxes. Because if no one was able to deduct any of these state and local taxes, what would happen? Residents would just be in an absolute uproar, and they would demand reforms at those different levels of government. But by transferring that tax liability to other taxpayers in places like you mentioned, Steve, Texas and Florida, you are essentially absolving those state and local governments from having any fiscal responsibility.
You're so right about that. And in fact, take it a step further. One of my greatest crusades of my career has been to privatize state and local services. And so think about this, folks, if you think we should bring back the state and local tax deduction. If you move into some towns, and you want your garbage collected, in many towns, you just go into the phone book, EJ, if they still make phone books, and you just look up a private company and you contract with the company and they will come and collect your garbage. And if you want 2 days a week, 4 days a week, 1 day a week, you just do it through a private contract. And yet other communities have the government picking up their garbage. And my point is that when you have a state and local tax deduction, you get a tax deduction if the government collects your garbage, but you don't get a tax deduction if a private company does. So you're slanting everything towards more and more government services rather than private services, and that isn't a very good idea either.
100%, Steve, and it's kind of like how we look at educational reform. I know you're a huge advocate for school choice and for parental freedoms. Parents should be able to send their kids to any school. They shouldn't be simply limited based on a coincidence of geography of where they live. And we find the exact same problems with education, where the whole system is grossly slanted towards public education. And if you do want to send your kid to private schools, in most cases, you not only still have to pay your property taxes to fund your local failing public school, you have to pay private tuition too.
You have to pay twice. Well, that's E.J. Antoni, economist extraordinaire, good friend. He works at the Heritage Foundation. He works with us at Unleash Prosperity. Always spot on, E.J. Thanks so much for coming on this afternoon, and I hope you have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I am economist Steve Moore. This is WABC Radio, the number one radio station for talk in America. And so I appreciate so much all of you listening. And we go for 2 hours right now because of the success of the program, because of people like you who listen in. And if you're a first-time listener, I hope you enjoy the show. We talk about politics. We talk about money. We talk about the state of the economy. We call the show More Money because we want you to make more money, and we hope to educate people about what is going on in this country. And I wish I could say glorious things about what's happening in this country right now, but I am very nervous about the direction of the economy, as most of you know who are regular listeners to this show. I am a Trump supporter, just for full disclosure, but one of the things I really respect is that we have a lot of listeners who are Democrats. We have a lot of listeners who are independents. We have a lot of listeners who are libertarians. I'm kind of a libertarian, by the way, folks, in my own philosophy of life. I don't want the government. I don't want Big Brother telling me what to do. And I've been like that since I was about 7 or 8 years old. I hated, even as a little kid, being told what to do. Now, certainly, a kid needs to be told what to do for sure. And my mom used to pull me by the ear if I got out of line, my dear departed mom. But my point is, I'm kind of one of these people who believes government that governs least governs best. And we've moved so far away from that philosophy in this country. And so I am a Trump supporter. I think Trump has been a great businessman president when he was president. And the big debate is coming up in a matter of days. My hope in that debate, by the way, folks, is I just want Donald Trump to be nice. I just want him to be nice. I don't want him to go for the jugular with Joe Biden. In fact, part of me, actually, I said this last week and I'll say it again. Part of me, I want Joe Biden to win this debate. Now, I know some of you are probably falling off your chair and hearing me say that, but here is my fear that if Joe Biden, falls flat on his face, and if Joe Biden has some of these senior moments where literally, and look, we're all getting older. I'm 64 now. I don't have the same energy or mental acuity that I had when I was in my 30s or 40s, although it is true with age comes wisdom. But my philosophy is that if Biden falls flat on his face, if Trump just knocks him to the floor and cleans up on in this debate, then I think the Democrats are going to go to their convention in Chicago in next month, and I think they're going to dump him. They're going to say, Joe, it's not going to be you. It's going to be Kamala, or it's going to be the governor of California, or it's going to be, some of these other people who have ambitions of being president in the United States. Gavin Newsom is one person. He's the governor of California that a lot of Democrats seem to have fallen in love with, although I think it would be tough for Gavin Newsom because he's driven California into the ground. But nonetheless, as a Trump guy, I want to run against Biden. I want this to be about Trump versus Biden on the economy. Who do you trust more? Who do you think is going to do a better job in the 4 years ahead? And by the way, both of these two presidents, whichever one gets elected, will be a lame duck president. That is to say, neither will be able to run for re-election because they have both served one term already. And so I think by the end of the second year of whichever president is elected in 2024, will probably be looking beyond that person to whoever is next in line, whoever that may be. But I'll be watching that debate with great curiosity. I wanted to mention in my kind of opening comments here about the fact that the New York Times and others have been writing these pieces lately about how dangerous Donald Trump will be to the economy. And I keep seeing these talks about, oh my God, he's going to cause a second Great Depression, and it's going to destroy businesses, and he's going to destroy American workers, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, gosh, where have I heard this before? Well, where have I heard these complaints before? And then, oh yeah, I remembered that in the book that I wrote with Art Laffer a number of years ago. By the way, we're writing an update of this book. It's called The Trump Economic Miracle. But the first book that I wrote with Art Laffer about Trump was called Trumponomics. And you can still get that book. And it's a fun book. It's a fun read. You can probably read it in a few nights. But it describes what Trump is like and why he did what he did. But what's really interesting is that we have a series of quotes in the book about things that leftists and, New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, the people on The View, all of these political prognosticators and some, major economists too, what they said about Donald Trump. And they said, that he was going to hurt minorities, that we would have hyperinflation and so on. And so here are some of the quotes that I found that I thought were really interesting. Here's one. Here was a headline from the UK. This is the British Independent paper. And the headline was, Donald Trump's first gift to the world will be another financial crisis. He will cause another financial crisis. He gives every impression that he will soon be hustling America and possibly the entire world in the direction of another catastrophic financial crisis. Well, they didn't quite get that right. We had a boom under Trump until COVID hit. Then Michael Moore, you all know Michael Moore, the liberals who makes movies, and Michael and Me and so on, and is, super liberal. He said, after Trump was elected, I have no stocks. I advise people not to invest in the stock market, not now. Way too dangerous with Donald Trump as president. Well, we had a booming stock market under Trump. And then let me see. Here are some more fun ones here. I'm just dialing down these. Here's the former chief economist at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. I don't even know why we're in the International Monetary Fund, but this is what Eric Zeitwitz said, former chief economist at the IMF. Are you ready? If Trump wins, we should expect a big markdown in expected future earnings for a wide range of stocks and a likely crash in the broader market when Trump becomes president. Yeah, sure. And then here's Larry Summers. Larry Summers was the former Clinton and Obama chief economist. And Larry Summers said in the summer of 2016, under Trump, I would expect a protracted recession to begin within 18 months. The damage would be felt far beyond the United States. And then here's an economist from MIT in the New York Times. Trump will likely cause the stock market to crash and plunge the world into a recession. And let's see here. Oh, a Citigroup, report said, quote, a Trump victory in November could cause a global recession. I could go on and on with these things, but it is clear that, here's my favorite one of all. Here's a Washington Post editorial in October of 2016, 4 weeks before the election. Here is what the Washington Post said in their lead editorial. Here is their blaring headline. A President Trump could destroy the world economy. Destroy it. Yep. Do you think he did that, folks? I don't think he destroyed the world economy. I think he helped rebuild it. Now, obviously, the COVID year was a tough one, but before COVID, boy, did he have this economy booming again. And so the reason I mention this to you all, folks, is because a big issue that is being debated right now is in Washington about whether to extend the Trump tax cuts. I say yes, absolutely extend them. They were a success. We got more revenue in. We got more business. We got more workers. We got more jobs. We got, it is not the reason we have these big deficits right now. In fact, a lot of the revenues have been increasing. As you can look this up in the new Congressional Budget Office report, the problem is not too little revenues. We have plenty of revenues. We have plenty of your money coming into Washington, folks. It's just they're spending this, and then they're spending another $2 trillion on top of that. And the reason I don't like the idea of raising taxes, and even some of my liberal, my more conservative friends say, well, we got to raise taxes because we have this big deficit. And I think Ronald Reagan, had the best response to this. He said, you never give an alcoholic another drink. Think about that. You never give an alcoholic another drink. Raising taxes is just giving the big spendaholics, another drink, another chance to even spend more money. They're not going to use that money to reduce the deficit. Does anybody think if we raise taxes, they're going to reduce the deficit? They're not going to reduce the deficit. They're going to say, oh, look, more manna from heaven than we can spend on these government programs, none of which works very well. And so I'm for making the tax cuts permanent. I'm going to make one last point before I take this break, that one of the things that we did with the Trump tax cut is that we doubled the standard deduction. And that means now 90% of Americans do not, itemize their deductions. 90% of Americans now check the box. You take your $25,000 deduction for a couple, $12,500 if you're an individual, and it's financially advantageous for you to do that. The only people who itemize deductions now are rich people, and so I don't want to bring back all of these deductions because I think it's going to make it more complicated for people. The other thing is Donald Trump got rid of, remember this, folks, the hated alternative minimum tax. Remember that? That was the tax where you had to fill out your taxes twice. You had to fill out one tax form and then another one and the alternative, and you had to pay whichever gave you the highest tax liability. And Trump got rid of that. People forget. I think today, less than 500,000 American tax filers, and those are very rich people, paid the alternative minimum tax. That was down from 5 million who had to pay the alternative minimum tax when Obama was president. And this was one of the very unheralded victories of the Trump tax cut, was getting rid of the evil, obnoxious alternative minimum tax. And I'm telling you, if Biden is elected president, he's going to bring it back. And you'll have the joy of filling out two different tax forms, as if one isn't bad enough. And then you have to, the way this works, I'm not making this up, folks. You fill out two different complicated tax forms, and then whichever one gives you the highest liability, you lose. You have to pay that one. I don't want to see that tax coming back either. So this will be a top priority for us to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. And I guarantee you, folks, that Trump is going to make tips not taxed. And I love that idea. My first job was working as a car parker of car valet, at restaurants and parties. And I made a lot of money doing that. And you made almost your money from tips. And we just stuff our pockets with dollar bills. That's when a dollar bill was worth a lot. That was 40 years ago. And, you could go home that night with $40, $50 That was a lot of money back then. It was tips. And I don't want the IRS reaching into my pocket and taking that money out. And by the way, the better job you do, if you're a tipped worker, the better, the more money you make. And that's the way it should be in life. Folks, this is the More Money Show. We got a great show coming up. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am your host, Stephen Moore, economist, and I want to bring on as my next guest, Jonathan Williams, who is the vice president at the group called ALEC, which represents about 3,000 conservative state legislators around the country. ALEC is an indispensable organization. And in addition to being an executive at ALEC, Jonathan is also the co-author of a group of a report that comes out annually called Rich State, Poor State, a ranking of the states in terms of their economies and their policies. Jonathan, thanks for joining this afternoon.
Hey, great to be back with you, my friend.
Okay, so let's get right down to it, Jonathan. Your report is out for 2024, and you're having your big conference coming up next month, and I believe you're going to be in Denver, where you'll present a lot of these results, but I wanted to give a little sneak preview, if I may, to our audience. And as I think of a lot of people in our audience know that I co-authored that report with you and Arthur Laffer. But let's start with the best. You know, we do the rankings every year. Give us the top 3 or 4.
Well, Steve, this has been a really consistent story at the top of the Rich States, Poor States rankings, because for all 17 editions for our economic outlook ranking, which includes things like taxes and regulation and labor policy, things we know matter for growth, Utah has been the number one state for each and every one of these 17 years.
Every year.
It's been an incredible track record. It really has. I mean, nobody has been able to dethrone them.
So that is pretty amazing. How many years have we done this now? 16, 17, something like that?
17 as of this year. And, from the start, though, I mean, it's kind of interesting to say, in year one, it was when John Huntsman Jr. was governor of Utah, they created a flat tax. And they were one of the first states in America to go from a progressive income tax to a single rate flat tax. One of the best things states can do if you keep your income tax. Of course, as Steve, you and I both talk about all the time, the best flat tax is a 0% rate flat tax and get rid of the income tax altogether for economic growth. But Utah from year one did that. And then they come back with our good friends like Senate President Stuart Adams on the ALEC board and many other of these great legislators keep cutting the rates. And it's just been so impressive between that and their property tax reform and pension reform. Utah's been an economic powerhouse. And by the way, they are a right to work state, right? Their right to work. I mean, they've just got so many great things, but I mean, it's not just us saying they're number one. They are the fastest growing state in America over the last decade when you look at population growth. And even I think U.S. News and World Report said now for the second year in a row, they're number one for their economic measure. But we like to say we were for Utah before they were for Utah. We've had about 15 years head start.
And by the way, Utah is also the youngest state in the nation in terms of the average age. So they have kids in Utah, something in the northeastern states where so many of our listeners are, there's just a shortage of children. Okay, give us the 2 or 3 other top achievers.
Well, and so it's a regional feel in the top 3 anyways. And I think there's a lot of competition between these states and that Utah's been a pace setter. But then right behind it at number 2 is you have Idaho, a state that has also become a flat tax much more recently in 2022. But a lot of deregulation, a lot of tax cutting there. Another big growth state that they're just getting tons of Americans voting with their feet coming out of California and other big government states towards states like Utah and Idaho. And then number 3, one of my personal favorites to talk about is Arizona, in a state that has become a flat tax state of only 2.5%. Arizona with a 1-vote Republican margin in the Senate and a 1-vote Republican margin in the House. And then you had former Governor Doug Ducey. They created this flat tax. They did universal school choice, which is, I know you and I have talked about that a ton over the last year with our Education Freedom Alliance, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and ALEC have been partnering on. Arizona combines the best of both worlds, where you have economic freedom and education freedom, just like Utah has done. And so really a mountain western feel to the top three for the best economic outlook states in America.
And all these states are doing really well economically too. I mean, anybody who's been to Arizona or Utah or Idaho, you see so much of the growth in these states. I mean, these ideas really work. Okay, now I hate to do it, but we have to talk, Jonathan, about the states that are at the bottom of the heap. And why don't you give us the starting from which state came out worse this year?
Well, Steve, bad news here for your listeners, because it's actually New York that comes in dead last.
Number 50.
50th out of 50.
God. So what does New York do wrong? Tell me what they're doing wrong in New York.
Well, you look at the resume there for New York, and, we actually spent tax day, my team and I, in Albany, talking with the legislators about how do you dig out of the hole, right? And the first way to do that is stop digging it deeper, obviously, and stop passing these ridiculous new tax increases that are being proposed and new regulations. But you look at New York, and it's some of the highest income taxes across the board, some of the highest business taxes, some of the highest property taxes, of course, not a right-to-work state, egregious high levels of minimum wage, things, a policy that you've written about for decades, Steve, that sounds good, but is the absolute worst thing you can do is a training wage for young people coming out of high school and college looking to find their first job. So tons of big government policies. And of course, you look at the overall spending and why these taxes need to be so high in New York. Yeah. It is the spending is abysmal. I mean, unbelievably high spending in the state and city of New York.
So, Jonathan, we only have a couple minutes left to appreciate you taking some time out of your busy weekend. We've got a lot of listeners in New Jersey. How did they do?
A little bit better, but still bottom 5 or 6 states there. New Jersey comes in at 46th out of the 50 states. I mean, not a surprise. Vermont at 49th, Illinois, your home state, at 48th, and California at 47th. So not a lot of surprises because there's
a lot of work to be done.
Philosophy.
So, Jonathan, I think I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal this week that New Jersey just raised their business tax rate, and I thought New Jersey already had one of the highest business tax rates. Am I getting that wrong, or?
No, you're 100% right. New Jersey already had one of the very highest business taxes, and that corporate income tax surcharge that was supposed to go away. They're raising taxes. They raised them during the pandemic. I think the only state in America during the pandemic to raise taxes. Now they're doing it again.
Amazing. Oh, Jonathan, we've got a lot of work to do in these northeastern states, no question about it. By the way, California is also a laggard as well, right?
Yeah, they are absolutely 47th. And the ballot initiative that was supposed to try to tackle these high taxes, it sounds like the California Supreme Court just tossed it off the ballot, as you may have seen in just last 24 hours.
Amazing. I mean, it's just so sad that these high tax states and the high spending states and the high regulation states just don't get it. I mean, they're doing so much damage to their own citizens. That was Jonathan Williams, folks, who is the vice president at the group called ALEC, and the report, I want everybody to go look it up on the web, is called Rich States, Poor States. Full disclosure, I'm one of the co-authors of that with the great Jonathan Williams and Arthur Laffer. If you live in New Jersey, if you live in Connecticut, if you live in New York, you got to either get your government to reform itself or you got to get out of these places. I guess that's the message. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining. We'll be right back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. It's the More Money Show. I'm very pleased and really honored to have Dave Bossie on. Dave Bossie, you all know, ran the Trump campaign in a masterful way in 2016. Trump would not have been president if it had not been for Dave Bossie. And, of course, he has a key role in the campaign this time around. And I know, Dave, you've got meetings with the president this weekend. How do you feel like things are going?
Oh, boy, Steve, I'm a guy who always wants to run through the tape. So this is a hectic time. There's a lot of moving parts, but the president is doing an amazing job against all odds. He's got a team that's really working hard. We're really putting the final touches on the convention, for next month, less than a month from now. And it's pretty amazing that we're going to be renominating him again for the third time. And I can't tell you how excited I am for him and for our country, because we have to get rid of the worst president in American history. And I've said my whole entire life that Jimmy Carter was the worst president, but he has lived long enough to see that he's no longer the worst president in history.
Oh, I agree entirely with that. I mean, Jimmy Carter was a C-minus president compared to Joe Biden, who, I mean, really, when you think about Dave Bossie, I ask my listeners all this time, can you think of one thing that he's done right? And I can't.
No, he doesn't even look. He is well out of his mind. I mean, we all see the pathetic state that he is in. Everyone knows it. The White House won't admit it. But he's in a terrible place, mentally and physically, and it affects us around the world. When you watch the G7 or whatever number it was last week with all the European leaders, they're looking. You see what they're doing. They're looking at him. America is weak. We're weak at home and abroad, and that's when it gets dangerous, Steve. That's what President Trump did for 4 years. He kept everybody on their toes here at home and around the world. They didn't know what he was willing to do, and that is the power of peace through strength. And so whether it's Afghanistan, the Middle East, Ukraine, you name it. We have wars going on around the world that were not happening under President Trump. So just on that level alone, it's a different world. If you look at the economy, which is your, bailiwick, I mean, it is unbelievable the tatters that the American economy is in right now, when Donald Trump handed him an economy on a silver platter 3.5 years ago.
No question about it. In fact, the economy grew by 11% in the second half of 2020. It annoys me to no end, Dave Bossie, when Biden says, I inherited a disastrous economy. No, he didn't. He didn't. It was on the mend big time. And then Biden actually slowed it down. I would just disagree with you on one thing, Dave. Yes, he's losing his mind, but also he's proved himself to be just an ultra-liberal. I mean, every single issue, whether it's energy policy, tax policy, he's just a big leftist. And I didn't think of him like that,
Well, let me say two things. One is I totally agree with you, and we don't disagree on that. We totally agree on that. But it is really an unelected staff-run White House. That's the
true.
Danger, Steve. Okay, let's just talk about that for a minute, because he's surrounded by radicals, and he cannot lose the radical Hamas wing of the party. Okay, the second he loses that, he loses control, and he's never going to do that. So this is a serious problem for him, and so we'll just have to see how he's able to mutter through. But next week's the first debate. I was incredibly honored to participate in all the debates with President Trump in 2016 and in 2020, and so this is I'm actually going to be seeing him very shortly, and we're going to have a lot to talk about as far as the debates are concerned.
Well, tell him to be nice, because I think that's the one thing. I was watching the last debate, that he had with Biden, and he just came across as mean. But let me ask you one last question, Dave Bossie, and I know that you. Thank you so much for your time, and tell the president he has a lot of supporters on WBC radio. But
absolutely,
I'm kind of, believe it or not, I'm kind of rooting a little bit for Biden in this debate. I don't want him to fall flat on his face, and I think why I don't want him to, because I think if he does, the Democrats are going to, I think they're going to kick him off the ticket.
Yeah, but I don't know, Steve, as a guy who's a technician in this business, it would be incredibly difficult, legally very difficult, politically very difficult to replace him. And then the question is, let's just say you removed all of those obstacles. Who do you replace him with? The person with lower approval ratings, Kamala Harris? What are you doing? And then
that's a good point.
But then
would you be worried about Gavin Newsom?
Well, but here's why I'm not, and this is real. The second you put Gavin Newsom on, Kamala Harris cannot be vice president anymore for a couple of reasons. One, he doesn't like her, and two, they're both from California,
from the same state.
So you got a big problem. And so you have, but regardless, you're going to take off one old white guy and replace him with another young white guy, and bypass the current first black female president in American history. I don't know that the Democrat base
can do it.
Delegates. Yeah. Remember this. The delegates are elected as Biden-Harris delegates. Vice President Harris for 3.5 years has been racking up chits in state after state. She has her own power base now. If this thing goes sideways for Biden, don't think that she's just going to walk away from it.
Oh, that's a great point.
Quick. They're going to get ugly quick, and I can't wait for it.
So one last question on the way out. And I asked Corey Lewandowski, my good friend, who was also one of the campaign managers last time. I asked him this. I want kind of your serious answer, because Donald Trump is now, 76, 77? He's almost as old as Biden. But, I know I've been around him many times in the last number of months, and he seems at the top of his game to me. But do you see any mental decline or slowdown in Donald Trump?
Okay, so a couple of things in life. Joe Biden is 81. Donald Trump just turned 78 this week. Okay, so there's a 3-year difference. First of all,
that's true.
3 years young, 3 years younger. Yep. Now, there's young 81-year-olds and there's old 81-year-olds. Okay, I mean my dad is 84. And he could run laps around Joe Biden. He's just an incredible physical and mental specimen. And so there's a young and old every age, by the way. So Donald Trump is a young 78, and Joe Biden is an old 81. And that's the difference. There's no difference.
That's right.
I'm going to tell you right now, Donald Trump is as quick, fast, and furious and intense and as he's ever been. This guy is on the top of his game. I have seen no decline whatsoever. He's physically in great shape. He is mentally in great shape. And so the left is going to want to hang that out there because they're 3 years apart. There's not even a comparison.
Yeah, Dave, I would just add to that, having spent some time with the president recently, I actually think he's gotten better. I really do. I think he's a better candidate today than ever before. With age comes wisdom, and I see more wisdom in Donald Trump. I really do.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
This is WBC Radio. Thanks so much for joining. We'll be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This has been the More Money Show. This is Steve Moore, economist. This is WABC Radio, and want to throw out just a thank you to my great friend John Catsimatidis for giving me the honor of having this show on every Saturday afternoon. I enjoy it. It's really the highlight of my week to be able to talk to you all. I always say we have the smartest audience in America, and I know that because I take your calls, I get your emails, I get your texts, and I appreciate it so much when people tell me what they like and what they don't like about the show, and there is always room for improvement. We know that. Well, I want to make a couple of final points before the end of the hour, and the first one is just to follow up with that conversation earlier today with Dave Bassi, one of the major campaign managers for Donald Trump in this campaign, and some of his comments. And I agree with almost everything that Dave Bassi said. I think Donald Trump, having been around him, I spent some time with him last week. I've had dinner with him several times in the last several months. The guy really is at the top of his game. And I'm not feeding you guys a line. I feel like he has gotten better with age. It is true that there is, with age comes wisdom. I think he is a better candidate today than he was in 2016 and 2020. There was a little too much craziness and wildness about Trump back then for some people, and I think that's the reason he lost in 2020. But I'm seeing the good Trump these days. I really am. I think he is matured a lot. And you can mature even when you're 78 years old. So Dave Bossie was correct about that. He is performing amazingly, and so has the campaign. And meanwhile, Joe Biden, whether you like his policies or not, and I find it very difficult to find many of the policies that I like, I just don't see the mental acuity, and I don't see how he could possibly be president for even another year, let alone another 4 years. But I wanted to make another point, if I may, and this is something that I'm kind of undecided about, but it bothers me, and I would like your all reaction to this, and that is, should RFK Jr. be in these debates? And the CNN has basically decided no, that RFK Jr. will not be in these debates, and I think it's unfair. I do, and I don't know if it would improve things to RFK on the ballot or not. I mean, on the stage, but I think it would improve things. I think having RFK Jr. Take a shot at both these candidates and tell us why he thinks they're wrong, I think it would be a healthy thing for a debate. And my attitude, for those of you who are regular listeners of the More Money Show, know that I have had dinner with RFK Jr., our Unleash Prosperity Committee. I had a dinner with him 3 or 4 months ago. I was quite impressed with him. He does have that Kennedy charm. He was very engaging, and I thought I agreed with him. Let me say, I'd say 50 to 60 to 70% of the time I agreed with what he was saying. And I remember we asked him about cutting taxes to get the economy moving, and he said, hey, I learned from my uncle, and of course his uncle was JFK, the president in the early 1960s. I learned from JFK, my uncle, that cutting taxes causes more economic growth. And I just smiled when he said that, and so did everybody in the room. So he's a supply sider. He thinks that the government reaction to COVID was a total disaster. He thinks mandating vaccines is a disaster. And you know what? He's absolutely right about that. He thinks our government debt is out of control. He's right about that. Now, some of his issues, like, he's a bit of a conspiratorialist, that, a little bit wacky ideas, but who doesn't have wacky ideas? Joe Biden has some wacky ideas. So does Donald Trump. And now, look, I'm a Trump supporter, but even some of his ideas I don't like. And the other thing about RFK Jr. is if he belongs on that stage. I really believe that. You all remember in 1992 when H. Ross Perot ran for president against Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. Perot was allowed to be in the debates, and I think it was a good addition to have Ross Perot on that stage. And Ross Perot end up getting 19 or 20% of the national vote. And RFK could potentially get, I don't know where he's at the polls, but I could see him getting 10 or 15% of the vote. I really can. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't like either one of these candidates. And it's so interesting to me that you've got the two parties in America that have colluded to keep out any other candidate. I'm sorry, folks. I have a problem with that. These political parties are colluding, and they have essentially a duopoly on our political system at a time, by the way, when the latest polls show that most Americans, you know what the number one party in America today is, folks? It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. Did you know that? The number one political party in America today is independent, because people are angry at the two political parties, as sometimes I am as well. I mean, look, I'm a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. But, I a lot of things about the Republicans I don't like. Regular listeners of this show know I am not a Republican. Because the Republican line is such and such doesn't mean that I'm going to take the party line. I'm not in favor of sending $100 billion to Ukraine. I'm sorry. I think that money is going to be completely wasted. I don't think it's going to have any impact. And I think the best thing for America to do is just produce more oil and gas here at home and bankrupt Russia by putting them out of the oil and gas industry, and then they'd have to pull out of Ukraine. And so my point is, yes, RFK Jr. belongs on that stage. Shame on CNN. Shame on both of the political parties, in this man's humble opinion, for keeping him off the stage. I think it would be a lot more interesting, a better debate if he were there. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear from you all what you think. And next week, I'm going to take some questions from our audience about that because it's an important issue. Folks, thanks so much for listening this afternoon. This is the More Money Show. This is WABC Talk Radio. I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Long Island is more exciting than ever at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. Get ready to zoom into some serious cash with Zoom Ball every Wednesday in June. Win up to $500,000. 1 point equals 1 entry. 2 lucky winners will be drawn at the top of every hour from 1 to 5 p.m. to play Zoom Ball. Discover the excitement at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel.
If gambling is a problem for you or someone, please call the 24-hour toll-free helpline at 877-8-HOPE or text NY.